Hello, my name is John T. Boston II, and this is my final vlog for the Interfaith Leadership class with Dr. Keith Burton, MA 5304. I am in Columbus, Ohio, and in my context of interfaith leadership, I am responsible for interfaith engagement, or I engage interfaith leadership in three layers. First, I am a pastor of a Seventh-day Adventist traditional Christian congregation or church, and I am engaged in personal interfaith activities because of my role as a Seventh-day Adventist pastor, Christian pastor in that church. The second layer of my engagement, I am a member of the My Brother's Keeper, President Obama's initiative for mentorship, and that requires a high level of interfaith engagement. I am the faith-based representative for this region of the United States, specifically out of the city of Columbus. And then the third layer that I'm probably most involved with interfaith activity, interfaith leadership, and involvement is my role as a chaplain for the City of Columbus Police Department. And so all three of those intersect in a lot of different ways, but primarily I facilitate a high level of engagement within the interfaith community. And I am most interested and intrigued, and I engage in a very aggressive way the level of discrepancy between law enforcement and the African American community. A lot of times I talk about the Black Lives Matter movement, but mainly there's a lot of distrust that I try to mitigate through my interfaith leadership role, and I try to bring some balance to both sides and to those involved. And so my interfaith leadership journey actually began with this program. I didn't know that I was a developing interfaith leader until my Dr. Keith Burton, my professor for this class, introduced me to this program, and I began to identify that this is actually an interest of mine, and it's become quite a tremendous passion of mine. The mayor of the city, Columbus is the 15th largest city in the country, and it is the capital city of the state of Ohio, as I mentioned earlier. The mayor's office called and said, hey, we see you're involved in interfaith work to help meet some needs for the community. And they invited me to speak for the interfaith luncheon for the mayor. It was his very last interfaith luncheon, and I was completely honored. Unfortunately, I had been in a bad car accident, wasn't sure I was going to make it, but I did. And there were over 40 different faith groups represented, and that immediately launched me into interfaith work. I began to connect those faith leaders with mentorship opportunities within the community, so that we can kind of close some gaps. So that I was able to work with Catholics and Muslims and Sikhs and Universal Unitarians and all types of faith community, AME, Methodists. It was phenomenal, and I would go and meet with them, identify a common need. I see where they may be able to fit in that common need, and I began to organize them to focus on that. But over time, the challenges that we faced with providing mentors was that the African American community was not interested in a lot of the mentorship that was available, because we were involving police officers or people from the Caucasian community, ethnic community, and it began to be a challenge. And so when I consider transformative leadership, it became a valuable quality for me as an interfaith practitioner, because I had to identify a way that I was going to grow. I was going to lead growth in this area and provide a platform for the community to come together, led by the interfaith leaders. And so I began to engage that. You know, when you look at Peter Norhouse's work on transformational leadership and the models that it provides, I embrace a notion that transformational leadership is a tremendous value for the interfaith leader. It's absolutely necessary. It's to me, transformational leadership is more of a process that may actually be applied to a range of styles. And so you have these different types of leaders, but you want to make sure that you're engaging in transformational leadership. For instance, you take into consideration that transformational leadership, it actually there's a moral dimension to leadership, and bringing that into the equation, you begin to capture this concept that to engage interfaith work is actually a process of transformation. So in a lot of ways, it can't be, to be successful, it can't be separated. And because of the value of change in the interfaith context, not just dialogue and understanding is necessary. You actually have to approach it with action. How are we going to put action behind our understanding? And so I began to engage in different phases, different steps. We organized a peace march where we met with different faiths, and we met at the Capitol. And this is at the burgeoning height, would become the height of this Black Lives Matter movement, where there's this tremendous gap of distrust because of the inequitable use of lethal force on African Americans from law enforcement agents. And I said, man, if we don't begin to close this gap, we're going to have some serious problems. And so transformational leadership, it places a tremendous amount of emphasis on the followers' needs and the values and the morals. And I began to try to tap into that. Where are the morals where are the values of the faith community surrounding Black Lives Matter, or the inequitable use of force, lethal force, in these scenarios with law enforcement? And so in doing that, what I began to find is that law enforcement agents, particularly white agents, and you've got 700,000+ law enforcement agents in the country, and not even 15% of them are people of color. And so I began in my city to identify soft points. Where can I close that gap? Where can the African American community, or the ethnic community, mingle and come face to face with law enforcement agents and begin to reshape and refocus? And I look for these values present in other faiths. And I would sit down with all of these different faith leaders for different reasons, and we would have marches and protests, but then we began to try to identify other means. How can we have meaningful dialogue that's actually going to create new actionable items? And so in my context, as a chaplain, I began to close that gap. I would ask permission from my executives. Hey, can I bring some African American young people over and put them in front of the officers? We had officers leaving to go and keep the peace at the Republican National Convention. We put those officers right in direct contact with these young people. They were the first ones, the last faces that they were going to see before they got on the road. And I think closing that gap in that way makes a huge difference. When you look at the transformational approach, apart from all other approaches to leadership, it suggests that there's this moral dimension. And I tapped into that moral dimension with the police department, with the different churches, with the different faith community, the faith community and the different faith leaders. And I began to say, hey, do you think that there is a need that we need to step in on to help close this gap? And those faith leaders certainly saw the need, and we began to step in. And so what we did from there is we began to organize ourselves and into panels. We hosted discussions. That was dialogue, that was conversation. And we would put multiple faith leaders at the table or on a panel with law enforcement officials. And where law enforcement officials were losing trust in the community, faith leaders maintained their trust. So we put the law enforcement on the same stage with the faith leaders, and that nurtured the trust that the community would have in both parties. And that was really significant. We would take our young people from the community. We'd identify young people that might not come in contact with law enforcement, and we put them at the table. One exciting thing, the athletic director from the Ohio State University, Gene Smith, we were able to have dinner with him, lunch with him, as well as the deputy chief of police, with several young people in a very intimate setting, maybe five or six young people, and have them talk about some of their challenges and their concerns. And this was funded by the Columbus Foundation, which is a $500 million benefactor organization. And we were right there on the front line of that. Then I worked with other pastors in those panels, and we began to look at these challenges and create some solutions. One of the things I found was that police did not want to hear what they need to do to fix it, or what they need to do to change. And the community want to hear that there's nothing that needs to be changed. So I created an opportunity with permission from the law enforcement agents to find some open-minded faith leaders. We brought those faith leaders into the police academy, and what we were able to do in that academy is we were able to give them real-life scenarios that police will encounter and ask them to weigh in on the tactical training on how to de-escalate a scenario without the use of lethal force. And we used specifically African American leaders predominantly so that they could bring the voice from their community, different types of faith leaders. It was phenomenal. So you've got young people, that adds a layer. You've got faith leaders, that adds a layer. You've got the police officers on the stage, or law enforcement leaders and city leaders, civic leaders and community activists, and on the stage talking with the community at large about all of these challenges. And so what was happening was we were reshaping the conversation. We were refocusing it and reframing it and putting a perspective on it that this is an us challenge and not a them versus us, or we versus them. And that began to shape up in a lot of different ways. The mayor of the city certainly took note, came to the church after one of those lethal shootings, and met with the young people of the church. We suspended our worship experience. Other faith leaders came. It's on a Saturday, the Sabbath that I celebrate, biblical Sabbath, and came in and spent that time directly with those young people. Absolutely phenomenal. Other activities involved the chief of police meeting with the faith leaders. We brought in some of the mothers of these individuals who lost their lives because of probably unnecessary or undue lethal force. And those mothers came and shared their hearts. All of these things began to transform the dialogue and transform the situation. And in a lot of ways, we took the pressure out of the situation and we allowed the dialogue to shape the future. And it was changing me. It changed me because I wanted to find a way out of this, a way out of a cycle of distrust and a cycle of violence meeting violence. And all of those things created and have created an absolutely phenomenal perspective. And here, that's the value that transformative leadership brings to me as an interfaith practitioner, and that's the context in which I delivered. I hope these videos that you're watching now can kind of help and bring perspective, and I hope that you can see the value in these layers and these approaches, and all of these allowed us to transform our community and take the stigma and the sting out of what was taking place. Whose rush rise and bright stars through the